All right, so a guaranteed basic income of about $12,000 a year for all 300 million people in the United States would cost around $3.6 trillion every year, which is a heck of a lot of money. And it's incumbent on those of us who promote a guaranteed basic income to convince people that this is practical and is not such a huge political change that it would simply be out of the question. For context, this week, as I've been preparing this show, the Congress has been coming to the end game in a fight over a couple of infrastructure bills, the larger of which is dividing the Democrats because of its cost of $3.5 trillion over 10 years. I'm talking about $3.6 trillion in each and every year for the guaranteed basic income. So comparing them, how could you ever convince people to even give a guaranteed basic income program a try? Well, I think we have to do this in a sense where it phases in over time and shows its benefits to people. And here's how I would do it. First of all, I would reduce somewhat the cost of a guaranteed basic income program by excluding children and limiting it to adults. And it's not just to shrink the cost of it, but because of administrative reasons as well. Children would have to be paid through their guardian or parent, and you always have to keep track of who actually is the guardian. So it's much easier to help children and the parents of children, the people who have responsibilities for children, easier to help them through something like our current child care tax credit that's refundable. So we could build on that for the children and just limit our guaranteed basic income program to the adults in the United States, which brings it down about $500 billion to something like $3 trillion. So a little better, right? I also think there should be a clawback provision. The intention of this is to help people who have less property at the expense of people who have more property. Again, the principle is we can't justify anyone having a claim of private property unless we're providing that everybody has at least enough access to the Earth's resources to be able to survive in a decent fashion. The aim is to help people lower down the income scale and do it not so much for people higher up. So I do a clawback provision, which means my guaranteed basic income would be guaranteed for everybody to have at least as much as the basic income is giving, but not everybody would get it. So it wouldn't be universal in that sense. It'd be more like a negative income tax, that the higher your income is, the less you're getting from the program. I would say about 1/4 of the population, you could say up to $35,000 a year per household, would get the full benefit. The upper 1/4 of the population in terms of income, from about $120,000 a year and upward, would get none of it. They'd have, if they even applied for the basic income, they'd have to pay it all back in taxes. And the middle half of the country would have a scale in which, as they move higher than $35,000, they have to give back part of that basic income each time their income raises over a certain threshold. At the median income, that is where everybody else is either half the population is below that income and half the population is above, those folks who are right in the middle would get half the basic income. People who have less would be getting a little more. People who have more income would be getting a little less of the basic income. I think it would be taken away at about a rate of, each time your household income was raised about $7,500 a year, you would lose about $1,000 a year of your basic income for a single adult in the household. If there were 2 adults in the household, they'd both have it cut, so they'd lose about $2,000 a year for every $7,500 in additional income. That brings down the total cost of the basic income program to it cuts it in half. So it'd be down to about $1.5 trillion instead of the $3 trillion that we started out with. So much easier to fund, but still a big political stretch. At this point, what I'd say is the only way you can convince people to give this a try is to have it in a phase-in type of program. And I don't mean phasing in the amount of benefits you get, because you wouldn't be able to test how well that was providing for people. I mean phasing it in terms of a segment of the population getting it every so often. The one I'm considering, or that at least I want to use this as an example, is that for the first 2 years, 1/5 of the population would get the basic income. That means you cut down the cost of the program by 1/5, be about then $3 billion a year for each of the first 2 years. During those first 2 years, I'd also want to fund studies that assess how much savings we can obtain from giving that portion of the population a basic income. I would think there would be some savings because reducing poverty would mean there was less need for police services, for social services, for jails, for hospital emergency room visits for the people who can't afford a regular medical provider. So a lot of reductions in costs as people are able to lead lives without extreme poverty, and some additional tax revenue, perhaps, because it would be bumping some of those people into a slightly higher tax bracket for the rest of their income. Also, you could have a stimulation of the economy, and that means that the government would be taking in more tax revenue and everybody else would be doing better. So you'd want to study all those things in the first 2 years, and the aim would be at the end of that 2 years, not only would the fifth of the population be enjoying the benefits of the basic income and want to continue it, but the rest of the population would be saying our turn might be next. We might be one of the ones who gets the basic income. So you're building a constituency that see that they can benefit, and you're also demonstrating some of the positive benefits of this. So how would we fund the basic income in those first 2 years? $300 billion? I'll tell you a fairly simple way. Reverse the Trump tax cuts of a few years ago. That would add about $230 billion to U.S. government revenues every year. So right there, you're a long ways towards that $300 billion. On the opposite end, to show in a political sense, that this is balanced, I would say all the people who are receiving the basic income and also are on a social safety net program would have their cash benefits from the social safety net program cut in half. That means they'd still be better off because they're receiving the basic income, but also getting half of their former benefits of their safety net program. And I estimate the cost of this. I'm considering including programs such as the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, SNAP, Supplemental Security Income from Social Security that goes to the disabled and to seniors who don't have any Social Security earnings through the regular Social Security program, and TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needing Family, as well as unemployment insurance. So each of those, for the people who are receiving the basic income, their income from those other programs would be cut in half, and I estimate that would free up about $65 billion a year based on a fifth of the population getting the basic income. Together, $230 billion from the Trump tax cut added the $65 billion from cutting social safety net benefits for those recipients of the basic trump in half would come nearly to $300 billion. That's the way I would suggest we could fund it in the first 2 years. Doesn't seem like too big of a stretch. We live without the Trump tax cuts just a few years ago, and we're also saying when people get the basic income, they don't get as much cash benefit. So I think that would appeal to people as something reasonable and practical, and we could demonstrate how well the program works in those first 2 years. The object then would be, as you get into the second couple of years and have to raise additional cash or shift spending from other areas that are more politically protected, you're building that constituency and building your argument that this is actually something that benefits society in other ways, and you can there's some government savings that could then be applied to the programs. Here is where we veer towards things that are more difficult, like cutting the defense budget by a quarter, which would free up about $180 billion a year. You could also raise other taxes. I would definitely focus on things like capital gains, treating it as ordinary income and taxing it at the same rate as wages and salaries, and inheritance taxes, because the idea is the burden should be primarily on those who own a great deal of property. So an inheritance tax where you lower the exemption and you raise the rate, and a capital gains tax where you're capturing capital gains when people are selling whatever assets they own and realizing some increase in value. Those things would be added to the pool, but that's not quite as much there's a couple of proposals that I saw that would have added together about $70 billion a year. Maybe there's a way to bring it up higher, but not a lot higher. I think we're going to have to rely on things like a value added tax, or Andrew Yang's idea of a social media tax of some kind, or financial transaction tax, or wealth tax, as Elizabeth Warren has considered. A lot of possibilities for reducing expenses in other areas of the budget, and a lot of areas for new taxes or raising taxes. But I'm not going to get too specific here, because I think we should wait for the moment where we're able to get a better handle on what is possible and what's the right way to go, and also the outcome of this battle in Congress, to see if they've already been able to pass new taxes, which I doubt they have.